welcome to Crank It Up Podcast, the YouTube home of Brigand Games. I'm Jim Price, designer of Erudia Battle of Birthrights, and for today's video, I want to talk about the road not taken with the core set primaries. Even with 35 cards in the primary-secondary class, there isn't enough room to do everything I want, even if the balance is good, and sometimes good things get cut along the way, or there are things I wish I could do, but can't do easily. Sometimes we intentionally choose to go in a different direction. These design decisions are moments that I collectively call the road not taken, and I want to present one such occurrence for each primary in the core set to not only give you insight into the design and balancing process, but also possibly get you to campaign to convince me otherwise on a few of them. For the Calvary, my favorite card in that class is easily Outpost. It's so integral to their strategy and really fun, and for the longest time I was so tempted to actually make that their focus action instead of mount up. This would also insulate the Calvary against Shard of Gaia, destroying their modifiers. This unfortunately was never tried, even though I'd absolutely love to do it because I adore Outpost, and there are two main reasons why it didn't happen. First, it's hard to view mount up as anything but the focused action. Part of the balance of the card is the fact that it appears 3 times, compared to the single instance of Sylvan Boots. But it also provides key movement in the secondary because something needs to make the Calvary mobile, and without it, the secondary would be too stationary and too hard to trigger their benefits. But ignoring all that, a third outpost would just make Calvary insane. You'd have more outposts than the Shard can destroy, and if a horseman took a complete victory lap, it'd be 9 power with Godiva's command alone. So this will sadly never happen, but I do admit that if I was starting all over again, I'd find a way to make it work and balance around the triple existence. For chemists, their idea would have been really cool, but logistically impossible, making water on acid modular. Erudia's entire premise is that everything is modular, and the idea of class cards themselves being modular is really enticing, so much so that I tried to figure it out with water on acid. Currently, water on acid states the effect for each ingredient, but I tried to figure out if the ingredients themselves could have the water on acid effect. This would have allowed a different ingredient A, a different B, where you could throw in a different ingredient and get a different effect. In addition to this, having issues with card text spacing, what killed the idea is that it doesn't allow epinephrine to be a wild card. And epinephrine is the backbone of the chemist secondary, which I consider to be streamlined and perfect, and I would not risk losing its ability or their balance to get any effect from water on acid. Epinephrine also plays a key role in the non-water on acid context, as that protection can really thwart your rival's plans if you time it correctly. As awesome as a modular water on acid would be, it simply isn't logistically possible, and the chemists already have a rich playstyle, so I think they ended up exactly where they needed to be, as we were able to put more versatility into Cesium and Catch Potion instead. For clerics, designing the secondary was harder than most, stemming from my desire to have multiple paths to victory in each primary. This fleshes out each primary with a lot of depth, but when it comes to the secondary, it means that not everything will translate in a reduced form. This resulted in a card that I love never making it into the secondary, Ignite. I think it's such an underrated card because it can destroy rival constructs too, but igniting big cleric constructs for large battlefield damage has created many memorable moments. But there simply isn't room for Ignite because Cure needs to be there for Brioc and it's the focus action, and you need enough constructs for Fina to make sense. They ended up getting 2 unique constructs as it is because they are the right fit in terms of incentivizing damage. Well of Light helps you if they don't damage you, Healing Circle helps if they do, and Barrier prevents them from stopping your game plan. There simply isn't room for Ignite, and that's unfortunate because it originally was there, but I wouldn't want to cut into any of the cleric items. As a result, the clerics are the first class to have 2 double features that aren't in their secondary, although life isn't necessary because of Elixir of Life. To understand the fighter entry, we have to go all the way back to the beginning of the game's history. Originally, there was a second victory condition, if your rival reached 0 morale. This gave a point to defeating units because it was ultimately progressing the end of the game, and early on some of the games versus fighters were absolutely fascinating to see who would reach their goal first. But a trend started to emerge, where the 2 sides were playing a very different game, with fighters having no real incentive to score anything. When you look at the game system as a whole, there wasn't enough destruction globally to make this goal achievable for more than a handful of classes, and as a result, the morale system was changed to what it is today, with Kymel changing from a leader who removes an additional morale on defeat to his current form. I think there is another game out there where the dual objectives work really well, but it isn't Erudia, and I think the morale system ended up much better as a result in its resource form. There are too many classes that spend morale in interesting ways that flirting with losing the game simply would not have made sense to the average player. My knight entry is among the more probable ones I could see happening under the right circumstances because it is minor but meaningful and a callback to what knights are originally inspired by. If you were in the Discord, you may have heard me talk about relevancy checks, where I periodically go through all future cards in the system, looking for early cards that may lose relevance as the game progresses. This tends to lead to microbuffs, like with Loire, and Soldier has long been in that territory. But even before Knights were finished, there was a change I really wanted to make that I think encapsulates what the Knights are trying to do in terms of waiting and rising to the opponents when it matters. Changing Squire from a 3 who gains 2 power to a 2 who gains 3 power. Knights were in a really good place, so it didn't happen, and some players may feel that this increases the Knight dependency on weapons. But the truth is that Squires, if you play them, are gonna get weapons, and the growth potential is far more interesting at the other level. It does make them more vulnerable to conscription and destruction, but it's easy for units to gain 2 power in some respect, and the ability would age better if the increase was larger to avoid power creep. This is one I definitely think about from time to time, because it'd be nice to see. For my Scout entry, we need to look at one of my favorite constructs in the core set, Relay Network. This card does a lot in a small package, as it not only makes key scout cards better by increasing your unit count, but it protects you from a bad deploy, while also allowing for strategic double deploying with Informant. But it also has a nice external synergy in that it favors attack-based units, and I think that anything you can do to make attacks relevant is a good thing. It's become popular to throw a wizard or thief onto the relay network to exploit their attack and get a second chance at it later. Like I said, it creates really good external synergy. But this use case for Relay Network isn't necessarily internal. At one point, Relay Network was close to getting a position reaction rather than a play reaction, so that Kingsley could jump back into her deck as her job was mostly done. And that's still potentially possible, but the part that's always been debated is the other unit in the art, Jock. Jock is meant to be the payoff for the Swarm context, but gives the power to himself. If this were to change, it would greatly change the opportunity for singularly powerful unit strategies and allow Jock to jump into Relay Network without the loss of power. I think that this might make Scouts too strong, especially in the secondary, since it would clearly set up their Golden Bow target and take away from what Golden Bow is trying to do. As a card who only changed from each unit to other units, Jock has been a constant for the Scouts, but it is tempting to think about what would have happened if someone else could have gotten the power. When you look at Thieves, it's easy to see Shadow Step as more of a payoff card than a setup card, but there is no inherent rule that they must be setup cards. It's just often the case. However, did you know that Shadow Step is not the original focus action? Looking at the other Thief cards, which do you think it is? You'll never guess, because the answer is none of them. The original Thief focus action doesn't exist anymore, and there isn't a card that they have that's close to it. In some respects, this is a reflection of the value proposition of cloaking not being fully clear to everybody in the beginning, as cloaking to avoid power creep is a really good thing, but it was making the Thieves harder to play for the average player. So instead, the Thief abilities were rearranged to spread cloaking across more cards and give more reasons to uncloak, like with Shadow Step, which was originally a double feature. This caused a big reshuffling of the slots, like Coordination becoming a double feature, Scurry becoming a single feature, and ultimately, the creation of Eyes and Ears. The last part is notable because the idea of cloaking cards growing over time or getting benefits while being cloaked was an idea borrowed from ninjas, but that ultimately didn't happen much for them either. Finally, the Wizards. The Wizards were the first class to be done, and their metrics became the baseline for every other primary in the core set. With the Wizards, their balance story was largely around aligning the elements of the spells and getting the quantities correct, like Aquacade becoming a double feature and Spiral Flare becoming a fire spell. But for the briefest moment, there was a subtle change to each elemental acolyte in that they could search Limbo as well for elemental spells. The premise was that, if you let them search before and after you play it, would you let them search when it was played as well? This mattered most to Vulcan and Kalis, as it meant that if you already had played Emblaze or Windblade, those cards could chain themselves if you had the order of operations aligned appropriately. Messing with Limbo could have infinite loop potential, but for the Wizards themselves, it gave them a different playstyle in that it gave the Acolytes something to do when they already had the cards they needed, and made it easier to be flexible with what unit you play. This also comboed with Magus because it meant that he had more actions to play, since you could potentially double the same action like an Earthquake. If it weren't for the infinite loop possibility, I think this one would have a chance of coming back because it changes the type of chains and gives them more interesting options. Each class has an interesting design history, and I hope that you enjoyed these brief windows into the various outcomes that can occur. Sometimes things get dropped, sometimes good things get left on the chopping floor, and sometimes we want more but have nowhere to put it. Which of these changes do you find most interesting? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.